Hey everyone, my name is Ash, and this is my final for Introduction to Human Trafficking. And firstly, I'd like to say that this class has been hugely impactful for me. It has opened my eyes to the realities of human trafficking on all levels, from the victims to the perpetrators to the means, the methods, and everything. So I'm very thankful for the opportunity I've had to learn about this and how to make an impact, a positive impact as a future healthcare provider and just as a member of my community. So very thankful for that opportunity. And for my project, I really tried to focus on the prevention side of human trafficking and really focusing on that education aspect. And it touches so many parts of the human trafficking pipeline, from educating Johns on the consequences of exploiting women and children, to educating teachers and clergy members and parents on what human trafficking looks like and how it presents in their community and who are the perpetrators, their means of coercion, as well as educating people on the ways we can transform society to lessen the supply side of trafficking. So we learned from our class and from the Polaris Project that, or which demographics are most likely to be trafficked, and the ways that we can create social safety nets to help prevent them from seeking sex work as an alternative means of providing for themselves. So, or otherwise being exploited because they believe that they will be provided for. So I was so thankful to have the opportunity to learn about those things. And I also got to interview Marisa Berkeley, who is the founder of Love One Inc., which is a nonprofit in Sierra Vista, Arizona, that focuses on prevention from the perspective of teaching children or teenagers how to have healthy, meaningful relationships and how to avoid unhealthy relationships. And I also had the opportunity to go and observe and participate in one of their after-school groups. And when I talked to Marisa, she shared with me her background, where she explained that her first encounter with human trafficking was when she went to the red light district in Amsterdam. And until that point, she had an understanding of human trafficking as the movie Taken, where people were just kind of snatched off the street and put in cages. And I think we can all relate to that a little bit, especially if we had no former training or education on human trafficking before this class. We all came into it with internal belief systems and preconceived ideas of what that looked like. And Marisa's no different. And so she shared that story with me, and how seeing sex workers in real time in Amsterdam changed her perspective in a big way. And so coming back to the United States, she was determined to kind of make a difference. And she said that at that time, she started to realize, wow, this is a problem everywhere. This is not just an outside the US problem. It's happening right here in my town, and I can do something about it. And Sierra Vista is actually, it's a border town, or is like relatively close to the Mexico border. It is a military town. It's Fort Huachuca Army Base. And it's also near I-10. So it's got that interstate corridor. So it hits a lot of the markers for cities that are highly susceptible to human trafficking. And so I think the work that they're doing there at Love One Inc. is very important for their community. And when I attended their after school program, I liked the way that they created a safe space for kids to come and create meaningful relationships with others, where they felt safe enough to discuss, what's going on in my personal life, what kind of relationships am I having, and how am I connecting with others around me. And it provided Marisa that opportunity to mentor them and help them learn about, hey, these are the characteristics of a healthy relationship. These are what are appropriate expectations to have in a friendship. And these are inappropriate expectations. This is what an unhealthy relationship looks like. Because I think that's a really formative age group to be teaching these things to. And I found a lot of value in the education she was providing to them, because I think it tends to fall through the cracks really easily. Maybe some of these kids' parents work late hours and they don't have as much time to interact one-on-one. Maybe their parents don't have the education. I think that was reflected in Teresa's story in The Slave Across the Street, where her parents and her teachers, they did not have the knowledge or education to be able to help Teresa escape her situation or even recognize that it was happening. So those are kind of some of the problems that I noticed, and the problems that I highlighted that I was thinking about with the issue of education is educating people on the signs of human trafficking, educating people on the way that we can change it through social change and legislative change, and educating people on the effects. So I'm thinking specifically about Johns, and we saw some videos about that in our units too, where they would go and they would talk to Johns and they would say, they would show them the real consequences of their consumption of the content and of the women that they were exploiting, and sometimes men too. So I think that those were the key points that I was looking at in terms of the changes I wanted to implement for human trafficking. So in terms of solutions for prevention, I was thinking about, Teresa's story. And some of the key things that stood out to me in her story were that her teachings and her religious background hindered her from seeking help because she was terrified that her parents would find out she was no longer a virgin. She didn't want to endanger her family. And another few things that stood out to me were the security guard and her teachers who bore witness to the treatment that she was receiving, and they still did nothing. And there was some room for interpretation there where you weren't sure if it was because they didn't want to step in or that they didn't know to step in. Additionally, that her parents lacked the knowledge, and I could go on a whole tangent about her parents, but specifically as it relates to this, they lacked the knowledge to even be aware that she was in trouble. Even when a law enforcement officer brought her home and said, hey, I have this suspicion, her parents were very much in denial and were almost unwilling to see it. And she talked later on in her book about why she thought her parents did that she didn't think it made them bad parents. But then she kind of goes on to another portion of the book where she says, I think educating families and parents and helping them be checked in would be essential to preventing trafficking. And so, I think that there's some key points that I would bring forward in education, such as the definition of human trafficking, that it doesn't have to be across borders, that it can be something like as simple as just coercing somebody, like Teresa was coerced, where she wasn't even taken from her home. But it's those, just as simple as that blackmail, brainwashing, whatever, that just keeps them in bondage, and it doesn't have to require taking them anywhere. That's a definition a lot of people are not aware of, or that it can happen to anyone, anywhere, that it doesn't just happen to certain people at certain times. So that kind of education, what is human trafficking? Who are the most vulnerable groups? And, like I said, Polaris Project has some great resources on who are the most vulnerable groups, like the LGBTQ youth, which, that even ties into some of the religious background that we're talking about with Teresa and the purity culture. And okay, so this education will be especially beneficial for clergy members, especially as we're seeing a big shift in our country surrounding LGBT protections. And so they're some of the most vulnerable at-risk populations for human trafficking. Migrants, which immigration is also a huge issue right now. So I think education on that is also critical. And, people who have housing insecurity and food insecurity, which also ties into the other point I made about legislative change and wanting our country to invest in those protections for people to have social safety nets, like affordable housing, affordable healthcare, and other things that would prevent them from being exploited for financial gain. Additionally, the other things that I think would be important to talk about within education about human trafficking in the scope of prevention are parenting classes that help people know how to relate and connect to their children in such a way that provides a barrier. It's like a social protective barrier for people who are at risk, because now you have someone who's invested in them and somebody who cares about them, who's asking questions, who's noticing when something is wrong. So parenting classes could be a great option for that as well. And those could be offered by churches, schools, even just municipalities or local governments that want to offer those within their hospital systems, or wherever they're able to do it. So I think that would be really great. Comprehensive sex education, which is also really important for knowing about consent and healthy boundaries. All of it kind of ties together in giving vulnerable populations the tools to be able to recognize when they are being exploited, as well as giving caregivers and other community members the tools to know when something is not right. Like, this is not a healthy relationship dynamic, and I'm recognizing some red flags here, and now I know that I need to do something about it, which is also an education point of what resources do you have when you notice that something is wrong. Not that necessarily is part of the prevention aspect, but it all kind of gets tied together in ending human trafficking ultimately. And if we want to, these all connect to each other. So I think the last thing for prevention that I mentioned with education was Johns, or the buyers, and ending the demand aspect of it, which, I mean, heck, you get rid of demand, then there's nothing to buy, or there's no one to buy. So one of the videos we watched in the class included classes for people who were picked up for purchasing prostitutes. And one of their options to avoid like paying a fine or imprisonment was to take a course where they actually talked about exploitation, and they talked about the dehumanization of sex workers, and they talked about commercialization and the commoditization of bodies. So when you view people as objects for consumption, objectification is the word I'm looking for. When you view people as objects for consumption, it makes it really easy to rationalize that what you're doing is not morally reprehensible, that you're not hurting anyone, or if you are, you just don't really care because you don't actually see them as a person. And so these classes really focused on humanizing the victims of trafficking and victims who have been sucked into prostitution. And so I think getting to the heart of that and continuing to support and fund those efforts to change the way people are perceiving prostitutes and the way that they perceive sex, I think that would be a great opportunity for prevention as well. So those are my three key problems, my three key solutions. I hope it was comprehensive enough. I'm going to include in the description a list of my resources, and additionally in my folder, I'll include my bibliography for all of the facts I cited and the other things that we watched in the group, that I can kind of just link it all together so you can see my vision, where I'm coming from with this, and I hope this is helpful. I found this a really impactful story and topic. It is extremely heavy and challenging to contemplate all of the human suffering in the world, but I think it's a worthwhile task. I don't think that it's impossible. I do think it will require us to examine our internal belief systems and the way that we view the world, the way we view others. It's going to require discomfort, and it's going to require sacrifice on our behalf. But I think it is a worthy calling, and I think that it is possible. So thank you so much for listening to my presentation. I hope you found this helpful, and best of luck to you in your endeavors. So thank you.